Before starting this video, I would like to thank the sponsor of this video, Archdais, who have come up with an amazing competition called Mars Calling. But more on that later in this video. Frank Lloyd Wright, an architect with such an amazing life story that there is even a book which is inspired by him. Yes, I'm talking about The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Celebrated the world over, Wright has designed more than 1,000 structures over a creative period of 70 years. He believed in designing in harmony with humanity and its environment, a philosophy he called organic architecture. This man has had an exceptional life story and has left behind a legacy which is still valued to this day. So let's uncover his life story. Let's find out what made Frank Lloyd Wright one of the most celebrated architects of the 20th century. Frank Lloyd Wright was born on June 8, 1867 in the town of Richmond Center in Wisconsin. His mother, Anna Lloyd Wright, was a member of the well-known Lloyd Jones clan. According to Wright's autobiography, his mother declared back when she was expecting that her first child would grow up to build beautiful buildings. She decorated his nursery with engravings of English cathedrals torn from a periodical to encourage the infant's ambition. Soon after Wright turned 14, his parents separated. His father left Wisconsin in 1885 and Wright never saw his father again. Now let's take a minute to talk about Wright's education. Why only a minute? Because there isn't much to tell you. In 1886, he was admitted to the University of Wisconsin. While there, he took classes part-time for 2 semesters and worked with Alan D. Conover, a professor of civil engineering. After his 2 semesters were up, Wright left the school without taking a degree. So all of Wright's formal architecture education happened when he was in the field itself. In 1887, after quitting his university, Wright arrived in Chicago in search of employment. As a result of the devastating Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and a population boom, new development was plentiful. He worked there for a year and then in 1888, he finally started to work for the man who taught him everything, Louis Sullivan. Louis Henry Sullivan, for those of you who do not know, was an American architect and has been called the father of modernism. He's the one who coined the term form follows function. Sullivan took Wright under his wing and became his mentor. Wright would later refer to Sullivan as Lieber Meister, which is German for dear master. In 1889, at the age of 22, Wright married Catherine Lee Tobin. Eager to build his own home, he negotiated a 5-year contract with Sullivan in exchange for a loan of the necessary money. 1990 onwards, Wright worked on quite many projects at the firm, like the Sullivan's Bungalow, the James A. Charnley Bungalow, and the Louis Sullivan House. Now, Wright started to have a bit of financial problems. He started to put in a lot of overtime. But despite Sullivan's loan and overtime salary, Wright was constantly on short of funds. He admitted that his poor finances were likely due to his expensive tastes in wardrobe and vehicles and the extra luxury he designed into his house. To supplement his income and repay his debts, he accepted independent commissions for at least 9 houses. These bootlegged houses, as he later called them, were conservatively designed in variations of the fashionable Queen Anne and colonial revival styles. Nevertheless, unlike the prevailing architecture of that period, each house emphasized simple geometric massing and contained features such as bands of horizontal windows, occasional cantilevers, and open floor plans, which would become hallmark of his later work. Now, even though he designed these houses in his own time, Sullivan knew nothing of these independent works until 1893. By doing independent work, Wright was in breach of his contract with Louis Sullivan, and he was thus fired. The whole argument must have been very heated because Wright and Sullivan did not meet or speak for the next 12 years. After decades of estrangement, Wright would again become close to Sullivan in the early 1920s. It is said that when Sullivan died, his funeral was paid for by Frank Lloyd Wright. In the last years of his life, Wright publicly paid tribute to Louis Sullivan and the architectural revolution he had achieved. But we seem to have jumped way ahead in time. Let's come back to 1893. After leaving Louis Sullivan's firm, Wright established his own practice. His projects during this period followed two basic models. The first was combining Sullivan-esque ornamentation with the emphasis on simple geometry and horizontal lines. The second was for his more conservative clients, where he designed more traditional dwellings. These included the Tudor Revival style Moore House and the Queen Anne style Charles E. Roberts House. Now let's come to one of the most important styles of architecture that Wright pioneered, the Prairie style. Between 1900 and 1901, Frank Lloyd Wright completed 4 houses which have since been identified as the onset of the Prairie style. Characterized by dramatic horizontal lines and masses, the Prairie buildings that emerged in the first decade of the 20th century evoked the expansive Midwestern landscape. The buildings reflect an all-encompassing philosophy that Wright termed organic architecture. By this, Wright meant that the architecture should be suited to its environment and should be a product of its place, purpose, and time. Wright had now started to become known in a lot of circles because of his impressive designs. Other early public notable buildings included the Larkin Administration Building, the Midway Gardens, and the Banff National Park Pavilion. And oh yes, the Imperial Hotel in Japan. Wright spent almost 3 years living in Japan during the construction of this project. Speaking of Japan, even though most famous as an architect, Wright was an active dealer in Japanese art. He frequently served as both architect and art dealer to the same clients. For a time, Wright made more from selling art than from his work as an architect. By the way, we seem to have missed a bit of his personal life. Let's go back to 1903. During this time, while Wright was designing a house for Edwin Cheney, he became enamored with Cheney's wife, Mama. Mama Borthwick Cheney was an early feminist and Wright viewed her as his intellectual equal. Soon, a relationship blossomed between the two, and in 1909, Wright and Mama Cheney met up in Europe, leaving their spouses and children behind. Wright remained in Europe for almost a year. During this European hiatus, Wright worked on 2 publications of his work. These publications brought international recognition to his work and greatly influenced other architects all over the world. After Wright returned to the United States in October 1910, he persuaded his mother to buy land for him in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Wright began to build himself a new home, which he called Taliesin. Mama and Wright lived in this new house until one of the most bizarre incidents took place. On August 15, 1914, while Wright was working in Chicago, a servant, Julian Carlton, set fire to the living quarters of Taliesin and then murdered 7 people with an axe as the fire burnt. The dead included Mama and her 2 children. Carlton swallowed hydrochloric acid immediately following the attack in an attempt to kill himself. He was nearly lynched on the spot but was taken to the Dodgeville jail. Carlton died from starvation 7 weeks after the attack. His motive for the attack was never explained and is still to this day unknown. The story of Frank Lloyd Wright is filled with ups and downs and highs and lows, and this was a very low point. Heartbreaking as it would have been, Wright actually did get through it. He not only found love again, but his career saw never seen before highs. But before all this could happen, his life went through quite a few tumultuous times. But all of that information is too much to contain in just one video. And that is why this is a 3-part series. I will have part 2 and part 3 on the life of Frank Lloyd Wright out soon. But before you leave, let's look at the competition Mars Calling by Archdais. What will life on Mars look like? Firms like Big are now experimenting with projects like Mars Science City to see how mankind can live on this alien planet. Of course, living on the red planet will not be easy, but imagining a new society with a completely different set of challenges is surely exciting. Keeping this excitement in mind, Archdais has come up with a new drawing competition titled Mars Calling. They are inviting you to imagine taking a walk on Mars and sketching and illustrating what a Martian street will look like. Your entry could be a Lumen render or even a pencil sketch. And the best part is, this competition is open to anyone and everyone, regardless of whether you are in school, in college, or even in the field. This competition will be judged by some incredible illustrators, namely Warren Lau, Ruby Taylor, and Warwick Wong. So if you're interested in imagining what life on Mars would be like, then head over and check out their brief. You can find the link in the description below. And that is the end of this video, guys. Part 2 on the life of Frank Lloyd Wright will be out soon. Until then, don't forget to like this video, to share it, and to subscribe to the channel. And do consider supporting this channel on Patreon. You can find the link to that as well in the description below.